Hello, it's me, the Avatar Fanatic, and today I will talk about why Taga was right. Taga's philosophy is pretty easy to dismiss at first. He's quite aggressive, he's willing to manipulate, and when confronted with the problem, his first instinct generally is not to find the most peaceful solution. But I actually think that's why his philosophy deserves a little more consideration. Because when you look at it from Taga's perspective, a lot of what he does can be understood as a necessary response to a world that refuses to cooperate with him. A good example of this is his confrontation with Aang over the staff. Aang's approach is obviously the more traditionally heroic and pacifistic one. He doesn't want to give Taga what he wants. He doesn't want the situation to escalate, and ultimately he would rather destroy the staff than allow it to fall into the wrong hands. From Aang's perspective, that's reasonable. The problem is that it completely ignores another possibility. What if Taga was actually capable of controlling the corrupting influence of the staff? The idea behind measuring the corrupting force within yourself is that you aren't necessarily supposed to eliminate every source of temptation. You're supposed to understand what temptation does to you and learn how to control it. Taga understood this distinction, while Aang did not. He did not believe that becoming a better person meant removing every dangerous influence from your life. He believed that becoming stronger meant understanding those influences and learning how to temper them. Aang's decision to destroy the staff therefore represents a fundamentally different and stupid philosophy. Rather than confronting the source of corruption and learning to withstand it, he removes the opportunity altogether to rebuild the airbenders. And that might seem responsible on the surface, but it also means that the lesson is never learned. If you actually want to know how much control you actually have over yourself, eventually you have to test that control, test the limits and the boundaries. You can't spend your entire life removing every temptation and then claim that you've mastered it. At some point, you have to understand what you're capable of and learn where your limits are. That's what Taga was willing to do. He had the courage, he had the valor, he had the want and the desire to make something new, to rebuild the Air Nation. There was also another important consequence to Aang destroying the staff. The Airbenders lost the complete opportunity to benefit from it. If Taga had been allowed to use the staff, the Airbenders could potentially have prospered alongside him. Instead of treating the staff as an inherently destructive object, Taga's philosophy allowed for the possibility that its power could be controlled and put towards something productive. Aang never allowed that possibility to develop. Also, the Earthbenders had massacred the airbenders 5,000 years ago. The firebenders only 100 years back had massacred the airbenders again. So eliminating these sources of problems meant that the airbenders were safer. They could prosper, they can rule their lands and their indigenous areas, and nomads can be nomads and not be persecuted for what they have done. And Aang getting rid of this possibility just completely ruined the whole ordeal. The same difference in philosophy can be seen in their confrontation itself. Aang's instinct is to avoid conflict. Taga's is to confront it directly. Aang believes that if both sides are willing to remain peaceful, a solution can eventually be found. Taga recognizes that this isn't always enough. Sometimes one side has to be willing to stand firm, even if that means creating confrontation in the short term. If you see Avatar Sonam, he and the Airbenders fought the Earthbenders and their persecution by creating the staff. This was an example of how another Avatar would have reacted to this differently. Avatar Kyoshi also would have advised Aang to be more forthright in confronting people who were against them rather than for them. Avatar Yangchen would have also had a more aggressive predisposition than Aang would have. And Avatar Sonam is no guidance to take on this subject, a scarred part of Sonam's identity that you shouldn't really take them seriously on this at all. From Taga's perspective, refusing to confront a problem doesn't necessarily make the problem disappear. It can simply allow it to become more difficult later. This is why Taga's philosophy puts so much emphasis on strength and personal responsibility. Someone has to be willing to make decisions when everyone else is hesitating. Someone has to be willing to accept the consequences of those decisions. And someone has to be willing to confront the darker aspects of themselves instead of pretending that they do not exist. Katara in the show had this character arc with bloodbending, and she chose to not confront her abilities, and this was a mistake that is similar to the one that Aang is making and one that Taga is not making. Taga was willing to do all three of those things. And when things went wrong, it wasn't necessarily because Taga had made the wrong decision. Sometimes It was because the other people interfered with the process that he was trying to finish. They refused to cooperate. They misunderstood what he was trying to accomplish. And sometimes they simply weren't willing to accept the difficult choices required to achieve a better outcome. Taga wasn't creating problems for the sake of creating problems. He was responding to the circumstances as he understood them. And if those circumstances occasionally require drastic action, then perhaps the responsibility lies with the person responding and more with the person who created the situation in the first place. You see how Aang had built Republic City, and by the end of Korra's life, it was ruined. It fell apart. And this is because that system, that model, is simply not sustainable. This utopian fantasy got proven wrong again and again and again. Taga was proven right. If the Airbenders had power, maybe this disaster in the world would not have happened. And this is why Taga's philosophy is correct and Aang's is obviously wrong. It's complete nonsense. He understood that peace without strength is fragile. He understood that avoiding corruption is not the same thing as mastering. And he understood that sometimes the person willing to make the unpopular decision is the person most capable of moving everyone forward. Aang chose to destroy the magic airbending staff, and Taga was willing to use it to achieve his means. He was willing to confront the difficulties with operating the staff. It's easy to criticize Taga for the way that he approached these problems, and it's worth asking whether the world might have been better off if people had simply just trusted him a little bit more. Because maybe he wasn't the one that needed to change. Maybe it was everybody else. Maybe they had to get in line, because Taga was the one who really knew what was happening. And he's been proven right again and again and again. And this is me, the Avatar Fanatic out. God, Aang is one dumb avatar.